when Prince Fielder came to the Rangers, we did the Soul Glow that he had in Milwaukee and Detroit, and then he, we could get a list from the clubhouse. We'll say, hey, what do you want this year? Well, I noticed on there he had air raid siren, and and I thought, okay, we're in Texas where we have a lot of tornado activity. Is that something we want to do? Well, I went ahead and did it. We've always tried to do what they want to make them feel at home. And of course, the first time he comes up, we're playing the air raid siren. Of course, fans are saying, "Hey, why are you? We're in Texas. Why are you playing that? It's scaring me. Are there storm warnings?"
Yeah.
And so finally, after about a month of that, I had an opportunity to interview Prince at a foundation fundraiser, and I just flat out asked him, I said, hey, Prince, we're in Texas here, and you got the air raid siren, and it's like a tornado's coming. And he said, I said, why do you use that? And he said, well, I just want people to know, and especially the pitcher know, that something bad's about to happen.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Set Lusting Bruce, your podcast all about Bruce Springsteen, his music, and mostly his fans. I am your host, Jesse Jackson, but we are getting off the Bruce Springsteen train today, though I'm sure he will come up as he normally does. And we are talking baseball. We are talking announcing. We are talking the Grand Ole Opry. And I am talking to someone who is a DFW icon, the great Chuck Morgan. Chuck, thanks for joining me.
Great to be here, and honor to be with you, and looking forward to this. So great, Jesse. Appreciate it.
Yeah, so for those of you, everyone in DFW is going, I know that voice. But for the people outside of DFW, tell a little bit about yourself.
Well, I've been with the Texas Rangers for 40 years, and I came to Texas as their public address announcer, and knowing that you can't make a living just being a public address announcer, they also had me involved in sales. And after a couple of months of trying to sell some things, I thought maybe I made the wrong decision to leave Nashville. Had a lot of great things going on in Nashville, but prior to coming here, I was with the Grand Ole Opry and WSM Radio in Nashville, and kind of a career change. I've always had been a baseball fan, but I do all. I'm responsible for everything that you see and hear in the ballpark, and I've done that for Arlington Stadium, the ballpark in Arlington, and now Globe Life Field. So, but I'm also responsible for the giveaway schedule. So I deal with a lot of bobbleheads and snow monkeys and things of that nature.
Yes, I have my snow monkey. I was just telling you, and hold on. My Pudge Rodriguez bobblehead. Funny story. The night that they were giving those away, my son, who is now 32, but Pudge was his favorite player. Pudge and Mickey Tettleton when he was a kid. Those were the two people he adored. And like he made sure we were there at the game, like the moment the gate opened so he could get them. He wanted to make sure he got a Pudge bobblehead.
That's awesome. That's awesome.
The joke is among us fans, and maybe you can you took a break from the Rangers for 1 year, and it felt like they hired 5 people to replace you. Is that an exaggeration, or is that kind of sort of true?
It's kind of sort of true, because I'm an old dinosaur. I mean, I worked for the Nashville Sounds as their PA guy for a little bit, and a guy named Larry Schmittou had brought me to Texas. Well, back in those days, in the late '70s, early '80s, working in the minor leagues, you wore a lot of hats, and so Larry kind of did the same thing when he came to Texas. So I wore a lot of hats with the Rangers. Not only did I do the public address announcing, but I also played all the music. I ran the soundboard. I was involved in sales. So yeah, and that just over the years, it developed to where when we got a video board with my background, I was put in charge of the video board production and then all the scoreboard production. So when I left here, it took several people to replace what I was doing. I had a public address announcer, and needed a guy that could run the soundboard, needed a guy that could play the music, and then to handle the video board. So that's what happened. And I was not real happy with the Rangers when I left here back in 2002. It didn't feel like it was being run like a baseball team anymore. And I had an option, and I went to Kansas City for 8 months. Had a great time, great fans up there. Got to announce in Kauffman Stadium, and but I came back and at the end of the season, and the rest is history.
Yeah, the new ballpark, you have you have your little bitty computer room kind of, and when we walk by it, we go, there is where Chuck makes the magic. So I was really disappointed, I think, like everyone else, that with COVID, you couldn't see the new ballpark. It was just horrible for us. And so when we went to go the next year, um, so my son, as I said, Pudge, Mickey, he's walking to the new park, and we walk by the old park, and he is saying, this is ridiculous. I can't believe this beautiful park is here. There is no need to change. This is iconic. I grew up here. He's just complaining the whole time. And when he walks in the new park and feels the air conditioning, he says, F that park.
You know, my wife and I had a similar situation back in 2000, either 15 or 16, long before they ever thought about a new park here.
Yeah.
We had gone to a Rangers Astros game late in the season. We went to Minute Maid Park, and it was a hot day in Houston. And I can remember we walked through the doors of Minute Maid, and I turned to her and I said, "Good God, we need air conditioning," because it's just. And I watched for Jesse. I watched for years fans at both Arlington Stadium and the ballpark in Arlington just suffer in the heat of a Texas summer. And not only was it that, but also we'd have these rain delays, and I first started in baseball. Rain delays were maybe an hour, hour and a half, but suddenly it became, it's so important to get that game played. Some of these rain delays would go 2 to 3 hours, but the Texas heat was just tough. It was a great ballpark to watch a ball game, and people like your son and me, we both have a lot of great memories of what happened over there. We brought those with us, but that was a great place to watch a game. But now to watch a Rangers game on a Sunday afternoon when it's 110 outside and it's 72 inside is a little bit better experience.
So you remind me of two stories. It was one of the playoff games, and it was the rain delay that took forever. And it was my brother-in-law, Clayton Thomas. By the way, he's the one who suggests that I reach out to you. So thank you, Clayton. My son and I were all there, and it's just pouring. And so we're waiting and we're waiting. And I don't remember when. It feels like it was after midnight when we finally got to play, and the Rangers ended up losing. But it was, I remember maybe the Yankees.
It was.
Yeah.
I know exactly. It was 1998.
Yeah.
And the reason it's such a vivid memory, not due to the horrendous thunderstorm we got, but about a half hour before that game, we had a power outage from a car accident or something, knocked out the power. And we were about 30 minutes from starting the game and going nationwide with a playoff game, and we didn't have any power. And it came back about 2 or 3 minutes before we were supposed to start. So we played about 4 or 5 innings, and then it came this ridiculous Texas thunderstorm. And you're right, the Rangers ended up losing the ball game. And but it was a long rain delay since it was a playoff game. They wanted to get it in.
Yeah. So the other memory, and I promise listeners we're going to get to music in a minute, but we had many season ticket holders, right? You'd buy those 10-game packages, and so we had a day game. It was in July, and it was just brutal. And I remember it was the last batter, and he had 2 strikes, and I looked at my brother-in-law and I said, he might as well swing, because I don't care where that ball is. That umpire is saying it's a strike. And sure enough, he threw it. It's a strike. The batter went to talk, and the umpire was gone. He's like, nope, it's 105 in here. We're done. So yes, it is a beautiful park, but you're right. Boy, when you get that air conditioning and it is the new park has all the amenities, great video screens, wonderful concessions. It's a very intimate park. You know, even though there's a lot of people, it just feels good. So I'm really happy we did it, and there's hope that we're going to put a good team in there.
Yeah, and that's the thing, and I tell all the fans, once we start winning in this park, and you start to get into some of those great things that
Yeah,
happen that when you have a great playoff run or something, and we'll get those memories, and it'll start feeling like a lot more like home.
absolutely. So Chuck, tell me, where did you grow up and what kind of music did your family listen to?
I grew up in Southern Illinois, a town called Marion, and and it's funny, my parents listened to the hits of the day. So I grew up in the 60s. So
Right.
a lot of I listened to a lot of Motown stuff. So I grew up on Motown, but they were also country music fans. So I listened to a lot of 1960s country music. And so what they were into the hits. I mean, Chubby Checker and the Temptations, the Supremes, things like that, George Jones,
Hmm.
Tammy Wynette, Charlie Pride, stuff like that. And what really impacted my listening was my dad was a route salesman for a meat company, and there were a couple of days during the summer that I'd go with him on the road, and mainly to get where every grocery store he'd stop at, I'd get baseball cards. At the same
Okay.
time, he had the radio on, and we listened to a lot of music, traveling all day around Southern Illinois, selling meat. But that's what I grew up on. And then the other thing, Jesse, I listened to a lot of baseball on the radio. Obviously, I grew up close to St. Louis, so listened to a lot of Cardinal games with Harry Carey. And late at night, sometimes I would ask my dad for the car keys, go out and listen to the game on the car radio because you could get better reception. And I'd listen around the country. Well, once the game's ended, I would start dialing around listening to music on either WLS in Chicago or WLW New Orleans or something like that. So I got this mixture of the pop hits of the day from WLS, and then I'd listen to country on WSM in Nashville, and that's where I first heard the Grand Ole Opry. And my parents had taken me there as a kid, and but kind of a mixture of pop and country, but it was always listening to the hits.
Yeah. When you started getting a teenage and your young adult, was there a particular genre you were drawn to, or did you continue just to like a little bit of everything?
I continue to like a little bit of everything. I really focused probably more on. I really was into soul music, a lot of Motown. I can remember in high school, Cornelius Brothers and Sister Rose,
Mhm.
stuff like that.
Yeah,
Just the hits of the day, so things
sure.
like that. But Beatles. I listen to the Beatles a lot.
Yeah.
So, but I continued to listen to. It was just a mixture of everything. If I didn't like a song, I was on the pop station. I'd switch over to country. So,
Absolutely. So I don't know if you're aware of this, but as we're recording this, Bruce is putting out a new album tomorrow that's all soul covers.
oh, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, I'll send you a link to where it is, and you can look at the song listing, and you can go, "Oh, I know that one. I know that one." Just for fun, he just decided to do an album of nothing but soul covers.
That's
So
and people always ask me. I've played so many walk-up tunes over the last 40 years.
yeah,
Well, it'd probably be something Motown, and it would probably be a message that I would send to a girl in the seats. So,
yeah, no, that's exactly right. Um, so in your bio, you talked about you you shared your journey into being an announcer. Why don't you tell my audience a little bit about that journey?
well, I never really intended on. I mean, growing up the way I did, and I always say that the Cardinal success in the 1960s really impacted my life a lot. My life revolved around sports and a lot of baseball, and I always figured and always thought and believed, okay, one of these days I'm going to be playing for the Cardinals, or I'm going to be playing football somewhere, or I'm going to be playing basketball. And I never really thought about announcing, and the way that got started when I was 14, I had played in a pony league game at 6 o'clock, and had a couple of hits, had a good game. My dad gave me some money. I was going by a concession stand, a little league game where my brother was playing, and I'm the guy knew I liked baseball cards. I was getting ready to buy baseball cards. He said, "Hey, what are you doing right now?" I said, "Well, nothing." And he said, "Well, you want to announce a game?" I said, "Sure." He said, "I'll give you some free cards." So I got a couple of packs of baseball cards, and that was when I first announced a baseball game as a PA guy. And I never thought much about ever doing anything like that. And then I started doing that when I wasn't playing. I would do the PA for a game, and then I had a guy who worked at a radio station in my hometown, small radio station, and he heard me doing the PA and said, "Hey, you ever thought about getting into radio?" And I said, "No," but so by the time I was 15, I was doing a Sunday night country radio show on a small town station in Marion, Illinois, and that's how my radio career started. But even through high school, I worked at radio, but I never thought about that being a career because I was so focused on being some kind of an athlete. And we all reach a point in our life where that kind of that dream ends, and
Yeah.
it ended for me at Southern Illinois University. So then I got back into radio. God, radio was was what I knew, and really enjoyed that. I enjoyed listening to music.
How did you end up working for the Grand Ole Opry? And tell me some stories from that. I can just only imagine.
Well, I'd gotten a job at a rock station in Nashville. I was there for about 6 months, and I heard there was an opening at WSM, and they actually called me and wanted to know if I was interested in working at WSM, and it's really being in the right place at the right time. And I got to work with a guy named Grant Turner, who's now in the Country Music Hall of Fame, and he worked at WSM as an announcer and an announcer at the Grand Ole Opry. And Grant was retiring, and I got Grant's shift. It was at 4 a.m. to 6 a.m. in the morning was when I first started there. And and again, Jesse, it was just so much of being in the right place at the right time that they needed an Opry announcer, and they asked me if I wanted to do it, and shoot, there I am, standing. People that I had listened to when I was a kid in the '60s I'm suddenly hanging around these people, and for me, it was that's where I went to school. I learned so much about country music. I learned about their lives and how they grew up and things of that nature. So it made me able to do interviews during the week on a radio show, and it was a party every Friday and Saturday night. It was just a lot of fun, and hanging around a lot of very talented and interesting people. I mean, it was just a great part of my life, and really helped me become a better announcer, and appreciative of songwriting. And while I was in Nashville, I came very I met a lot of songwriters and did a lot of shows with songwriters, and really appreciate the work they do. So, but just a great time and I was there at a time that I was working at WSM at a time when it was still old school radio. I mean, we kept the studio door open at night. I eventually had moved at 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. And it was a lot like, country music stars would go out to dinner, and then they'd say, "Hey, let's go by and see Chuck." And a lot of times I'd get people with new records. Being where we were, we broke a lot of records. I mean, there's a lot of times nowadays that I'm driving down the highway, listening to Willie's Roadhouse, and I'll tell my wife and say, "Hey, I was the first guy to play that." And then she'll turn to me, "Hey, Chuck, nobody really cares." Somebody cared at the time, but
Yeah.
it was just old school radio where it was a big deal back in those days, still in the mid to late '70s, to get your record played on WSM, because we covered 34, 35 states at night, and then be at the Grand Ole Opry on the weekends. "Hey, I got a new record coming out. Can I come up and see you?" Sure. So it was just an open door, and not only was it country stars, we had a lot of country fans. We just let them come in and sit there and listen to us, and things like that. But it was a great time to be there.
I was born in 59. So I grew up on AM radio as well. And I was in Louisiana. My dad was in the Army, but by the time I was in high school, we had settled in Lake Charles, Louisiana. And same thing, listen to a little bit of everything on AM radio. But my parents were staunch country and Western fans. I mean, you watched Johnny Cash when he was on TV, a lot of Merle Haggard. Charlie Pride, all these different things. And it, so I love that story because it was a different time now then. And in a lot of ways it's a better time, because if I want to hear 70s soul music, there's a channel where I can hear nothing but 70s soul music. If I want to hear Willie's Roadhouse, where there's these older country songs, and we do that a lot when we're traveling. There is an E Street radio, there is a Bruce Springsteen channel for us, and that's a beautiful thing. But in a way, it's a little sad that there's not that diversity out there where you get a little bit of everything. Don't you think?
I totally agree with you, and I'm the same way about television. You and I pretty much grew up in the same era. When
Yeah,
I grew up, we only had three channels. And
exactly.
we're pretty much stuck with whatever was going to be on those three channels, and we were lucky to get we had the Yankee game of the week on Saturdays, and then
Right.
we might get a Cardinal game every now and then. But same way the radio, you and that's why I would switch off if I didn't like what was being played on KXOK in St. Louis. Okay, I'll switch over here to the country station to see what they're playing. But you're right; it's great and nowadays that if I don't like what's on 60s on 6, I'll switch over to the 70s, and then if I don't like that, I'll go to Willie's
Yeah.
Roadhouse. But yeah, you're
Yeah.
exactly right. But I
Yeah.
miss those days. I've had a lot of people ask me because I had so much going on, and I left a lot behind in Nashville, and if I ever wanted to go back, and I'd say if I could go back, I'm going to sound like Uncle Rico from Napoleon Dynamite. If I could go back, I'd like to do that. That's the kind of radio I'd still like to do, where they bring the record by and that old school stuff and do an interview. That was always fun.
Yeah. Once again, Bruce had done an album a few years ago called Western Stars, very Jimmy Webb, Glenn Campbell type songs, and he covered Rhinestone Cowboy. And I said, if radio was different, that would have been a crossover hit. Having Bruce Springsteen do a great version of Rhinestone Cowboy, but it's not that way anymore. And I stand by, there is still great music being made in all genres, but it is a little tougher for someone to find that mainstream audience, though the beauty of YouTube and um, all these other Bandcamp and everything that you can go make, like George Dunham and the Bird Dogs, right? He can
Right,
make
right,
music, get that out there and find an audience.
right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right.
So, um, you mentioned TV. Um, that's a frustration for me because I have Frontier cable and it is near impossible to get Texas Rangers on my TV. And I miss it. My son and I were talking about, because even in the summer, you would I'd put it on the Ranger game and have that going. And then if I wanted to watch something else, then when I ended it, the DVR is there and oh, looks like, let me back that up. Let me see what's going on. Do you get that a little bit from other fans?
Oh, I get it all the time, and it's very frustrating. And what makes it even more frustrating is that Frontier is a sponsor on Bally Sports Southwest, which doesn't make
Yeah.
any sense at all. But they're working on that. They're going to get that fixed. But I
Good.
hear from so many fans that were kids in the late '70s that they became Chicago Cubs or Atlanta Braves fans because of WGN and TBS and the impact that had of watching the game on TV. And if you don't have a great TV audience, and I mean, people say, well, I don't know if I want to go to a game or not. I haven't seen the Rangers this year, but that's a very important thing. And I know they're working on to get that fixed.
That's good. I do know that there's plenty of people that became Braves fans or Cubs fans, right, because of that. It was that out there. Um, the other thought, and we go back to baseball a little bit, we were out of town. It was a family get together, so we had three couples. Four of them were Astro fans, and then it was my wife and I. And so they bought me an Astros t-shirt, and so I'm wearing it, even though rolling my eyes. And so the World Series, starting at 7:38 on a Saturday. And I brought back, and I remember Ken Burns' baseball documentary talking about You used to play those games during the day so the kids could see it. And now then, because of TV revenue, we need it prime time. You've been part of that, haven't you? That over the years, you've seen that shift, haven't you?
Yeah, I've seen that, and a lot like you. I remember going to school in the '60s, and when some teachers would bring their black and white TVs to school, and you would watch the World Series in the afternoon, and or they'd bring you'd listen to it on the radio. You'd have a radio with you and listen to it
Yeah.
like that. But yeah, I even this year I was a little disappointed. I would in Texas the games would start at 6 o'clock or at 7 o'clock, and I was thinking, okay, well, I don't need an hour of a pregame. Why not just start the game at 6 o'clock? But
Yeah.
that involves tons of revenue and things like that. That's the way those decisions are made. But it really bothers me that a lot of kids today don't get to see some of the biggest moments in baseball because of the way the things are televised today.
Yeah. Um, that's exactly right. I just had Jeff Pearlman on the podcast promoting his Bo Jackson book. And he talked about that a lot of Bo's great events were not seen on TV. You just saw afterwards. Um, do you have any memories of watching Bo play or thoughts of that when, you know, in your years as an announcer?
And one of the greatest athletes I've ever seen. I mean, and some of the uh, having worked with Nolan Ryan quite a bit, some of the biggest moments that Nolan had was dealing with Bo Jackson.
Yeah.
The one that everybody talks about is the bloody shirt, and everybody today, that they don't remember what happened, but a lot of them think it was a Bo Jackson line drive off Nolan's face, but
Yeah.
actually it was a ground ball that went high up in the air. It was raining, and Nolan lost the ball in the lights and the raindrops, and it came down and hit him in the face, and then he had to get sewn up between innings. But and then Jesse, I had an opportunity earlier this year to go to Birmingham, Alabama, and be a part of a fundraiser for Rick Wood Field. Uh, and we had a chance to interview some old Negro League players. But at that event was a Bo Jackson's high school coach, and I got to hear some things about Bo in
Oh,
high school.
wow.
It was just great stories about him scoring from first base on a drop pop up from
Mhm.
another batter, which was amazing. But yeah, just an outstanding athlete, and actually, there's a part of the Nolan Ryan Robin Ventura story that Nolan will talk about it being at the bottom of that pile, and he really couldn't breathe, and that
Yeah.
he felt this big arm come in and pull him up out of the pile, and it was Bo Jackson that actually pulled him out of that pile. So, but yeah, just he was a tremendous athlete, and
Yeah.
I'm sorry he didn't get to have his career continue because of injury.
Sure. Is there a favorite athlete over the years besides Nolan that you loved watching?
Uh, I grew up with the Cardinals, so uh, I saw a lot of Bob Gibson pitching. My parents were fans of pitching, so I got to see a lot of. And it didn't matter if it was a school night or not. I mean, we went to if it was Bob Gibson against Sandy Koufax, we were there, or Juan Marichal and guys of that era. When I first came to the Rangers, we had a third baseman named Buddy Bell, and
Hmm.
Buddy to me was just a thrill to watch. And I've gotten to see two great third basemen here over the years in Bell and then Adrian Beltre. Uh, Pudge Rodriguez was a thrill to watch. But the guy that I really probably my other than Nolan, my other all time favorite Ranger is Juan Gonzalez, because when Juan would come up to bat, uh, there was always a chance that something bad was going to happen for the other team, and he was such a great player in the playoffs, two-time MVP, and I actually back in those days when Juan first came, we picked the walk-up music, and his was the Death March, the Imperial Death March, because always felt like, okay, something bad's going to happen with him coming up, and so we'd play the Imperial Death March. But Juan Gonzalez, I love watching Juan.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I also remember back in the day when we were going, um, after Pudge would hit something, the theme from the Magnificent Seven.
There you go. Yeah.
It was like, oh, love that. So that's a great segue. Um, do can you tell us the transition of, I guess originally, when do you remember doing walk-up music? Is that something that's always happened, or that when did you think, in your estimation, when did that start happening?
Maybe, I guess, early 80s.
Okay.
And the problem with it in those days, you know, my thoughts on where it all started was, you know, whether you were in St. Louis or Chicago in the 60s, most ballparks had organs,
Right.
and the organist would either play something as they, if they did something or they were coming up to bat, something had to do with the guy's hometown or something to do with his name or something like that. So that's probably where a little of that got going. But probably the early 80s, I can remember when I first came to the Rangers, we had a relief pitcher named Dave Schmidt, and he had told me when he comes into the game, he said, I want The Fireman by George Strait. Well, I had to play a record. So it was very difficult to play walk-up music in those days because you had to cue the record up.
Right.
So what's changed so much is I went from records to broadcast cartridges where you had to flip the cartridge and stuff. But uh and then by now, and even in the early 90s, we had these digital computers where you just had to push a button and music would play. So that made it much easier to do that. And in the beginning, we would pick songs for the guys, and then I think they started realizing, well, I don't like what he picked, I'm going to pick it. So, and now it's evolved into something it's totally, we've had situations where we've had some players that want 5 or 6 songs in different situations. You play the song, but technology's made it much easier to do that. And now, and you probably hear some of this, but I'll go to my grandkids' games or whatever. People that are 7 or 8 years old are now coming up to bat with music at that age at Little League games. And what's happened is that now you can take a laptop to a game, and with the software that they have available, that makes it easier to do. And that's what's happened in the major leagues and it's going to be interesting over the next year because the pitch clock's coming into the major leagues next year, and I don't know how much we're going to be able to do that with 15 seconds between each pitch, but that's kind of how that evolved, and it ballooned into something that tough to control nowadays.
Um, if you talk to my son, he will talk about wrestling entrance songs. He is a huge WWE fan, and he will, and I think, that combined with walk-up songs, it's almost your theme song. And I will hear people talking about, yeah, I'm entering a meeting and in my mind, my walk-up song is going, right? So what are do you have some funny stories or interesting stories? I imagine that's my softball to you, Chuck. Tell me some of the stories about songs people picked.
One of the a strange one time is I got a call from David DeLucci, who was an outfielder for us, and he called one day and he was struggling at the plate,
Yeah.
and he said, I want the Godfather waltz. And I said, are you sure? I said, it's not really a pump up. He says, no, I want the Godfather waltz. And he came up to the plate, and immediately the crowd reacted. They loved it. Get a bunch of people emailing or calling, hey, what's that? What's DeLucci's walk up song? And he ended up having a great year after that song came along. Uh, the the Latin music, there's some of that stuff that you know that's it has a different sound. And we had one from Elvis one time that they called El Chacarron, and it's really a funny thing to listen to. And at that point in time, Nolan Ryan was my boss, and he said, "Hey, what in the hell was that you just played up there?" And I said, "That's Elvis's walk-up song." And I said, I can't believe he likes that. But
That's a
probably
pretty good fake Nolan.
I've been around him so much, I pretty
Yeah.
much imitate him. But probably the funniest one is not a walk-up song for. I'll tell you what, I'll do a player and then a manager.
Okay, sounds good.
When Prince Fielder came to the Rangers, we did the Soul Glow that he had in Milwaukee and Detroit, and then he, we could get a list from the clubhouse. We'll say, "Hey, what do you want this year?" Well, I noticed on there he had air raid siren, and and I thought, okay, we're in Texas where we have a lot of tornado activity. Is that something we want to do? Well, I went ahead and did it. We've always tried to do what they want to make them feel at home. And of course, the first time he comes up, we're playing the air raid siren. Of course, fans are saying, "Hey, why are you? We're in Texas. Why are you playing that? It's scaring me. Are there storm warnings?"
Yeah.
And so finally, after about a month of that, I had an opportunity to interview Prince at a foundation fundraiser, and I just flat out asked him, I said, "Hey, Prince, we're in Texas here, and you got the air raid siren, and it's like a tornado's coming." And he said, I said, "Why do you use that?" And he said, "Well, I just want people to know, and especially the pitcher, know that something bad's about to happen." So that was his reason for the air raid siren.
Can't
Uh,
disagree.
and then the manager one, in 1994, we opened on the road. The Rangers had never really had any type of song for as long as I've been here for a win. We played Celebration by Kool and the Gang or something. But Rangers opened on the road because we were opening a new ballpark, and the Rangers had a big inning against the Yankees in Yankee Stadium, and right before that inning, a commercial played on the Yankee Stadium video board, and it featured Frank Sinatra singing "Fly Me to the Moon." Well, the Rangers have this big inning, so after the game, I get a call from Kevin Kennedy, who was our manager at the time, and he said, "Hey, after every win this year, I want Fly Me to the Moon." I said, "Not a problem." So all year long in '94, we would play Fly Me to the Moon for a Ranger win. And we played it up until the time that Kevin was let go as the manager. But years later, he came back as the manager of the Red Sox. And one night we're just wearing the Red Sox out, and he's made about 4 pitching changes. And on that 4th pitching change, I thought to myself, what a great time to play It's Fly Me to the Moon. So as he's walking out for that last pitching change, I start playing Fly Me to the Moon, and I see him look up there. He makes the pitching change. He's walking off. He gives me a nice 1-finger salute. But then later on, he's laughed about it, and from time to time. But little stuff like that happens. But there are so many crazy stories. Like one night, we were playing. We had a lead. We had a 1-run lead. John Wetland came in the game. He walked the bases loaded with no outs, and I didn't get a chance to play his walk-in song or his warm-up song when he was, because we had to run a commercial or something, and I didn't. So he loads the bases, and Johnny Oates calls time to go out to talk to John Wetland. I thought, okay, I'm going to play his music right here. So I played his music right there, and I'm driving home, and I hear Will Clark on the post-game show say, "I don't know what happened. Chuck didn't play his music. He loaded the bases. Chuck plays his music. We got out of the inning, and we ended up winning the ball game." His was "Don't Fear the Reaper" by
I
Blue.
do remember that. Yeah.
So just little things like that have happened over the years. And there was one time I got a call before a game, and Mike Napoli said, "Hey," he referred to Michael Young as Ranger Man.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, "Hey, tonight when Michael comes up for the first time, play the theme from Superman." And Michael got so mad. He called me during the game from the dugout and yelling at me and said, don't change my walk-up music." He said, "I can't believe you did that." And he hung up on me. And then I think he found out later that Mike Napoli was the instigator of that one.
Yeah.
And then we had a game one time. You may remember this, when our field reporter Emily Jones won a bet against Mike Napoli, and she
Yes.
had to pick his walk-up songs. And it was funny the first couple of times, but I think on the 4th at bat, he'd struck out 3 times. On the 4th at bat, the last song was "Man, I Feel Like a Woman Tonight" by Shania Twain, and he's laughing as he's walking up, and then he strikes out. And that was the last time we ever did that, because it wasn't as funny when you're striking out and you're playing funky walk-up music.
I do remember that. What I find not surprising, but surprising, right, is that during a game they would be that like you want to go, hey, maybe let's focus more on this, but it is part of the baseball is a very superstitious game.
It's
Baseball,
something. It's something, Jesse, that they hear when that makes
yeah,
them, focus on what they got to do, and
yeah,
that. And again, if it makes them feel like that, feel good at home, we'll do all we can to make it happen.
yeah. What you mentioned Fly Me to the Moon. When did we start doing God Bless Texas? Because isn't that what they play? Isn't
No, we play I Like Texas by Pat Green.
okay,
We played God Bless Texas a few times,
okay,
not a lot. Uh,
uh-huh,
we never really had anything, and ownership back under the Tom Hicks group, they really wanted us to have something, and and I came up with I Like Texas by Pat Green. He lives in
okay,
Fort Worth.
sure, great guy,
It fits pretty good for what we do.
good.
So we don't have a New York like the Yankees do, but I
Or
Like Texas works out fine.
or Sweet Caroline
There
moment,
you go. Yep,
right? Yeah.
yep, yep.
How about Cotton Eye Joe?
When I first came to the Rangers, um, people that have been here a long time since the team first came here, they, and I've always been a guy that say, hey, what's been the traditions here? What do we do? And not to change any of that, because
Yeah.
well, and even moving over into this new ballpark, I made sure to say, okay, this has got to sound like a Ranger game. So that's why we
Yes.
kept some of the stuff. Uh, so they told me, said, we have one tradition here. You got to play Cotton Eye Joe in the seventh inning stretch. So for the longest time, it was always Cotton Eye Joe in the seventh inning stretch, and then we got people complaining that we didn't play Take Me Out to the Ball Game, and I figured out it was long enough, the breaks long enough where we can play both.
Yeah.
But that's Cotton Eye Joe has been. They told me, people that I trusted and been here a while, they said, hey, you got to have Cotton Eye Joe in the seventh inning stretch, and so that's what we do.
Well, it is one of those moments that it's very comfortable. You're there, you've had your peanuts, you've had your drink of choice, and we sing out, take me out to the ballpark, and then you go straight to Cotton Eye Joe and you see everyone clapping. It is a really nice ritual. Win or lose, it just feels like you're enjoying the day at the ballpark.
And you're in Texas, and there's only one other place in Texas that could get away with that, and
Yeah,
I think they do deep in the heart of Texas in the seventh inning stretch, which we play earlier in the game. But
yeah.
you're getting into my mall theory, which
Okay.
I've always felt like a game in Texas needs to sound like a game in Texas. If it doesn't, if we sound like a game in St. Louis or Atlanta or something, it's like going into a gap in Atlanta is going to look like the same gap in Dallas, and I didn't want that to happen. I wanted our game to feel like, hey, we're in Texas, and this is what we're going to play. And we did. It's only two or three times during the game that you do that, but you've got to make sure, hey, this feels like a Rangers game.
Yeah, and we'll talk about like on a road trip, um, going into a national fast food chain. You have consistency. It may be mediocre, but it's consistently mediocre. You aren't going to be disappointed. You aren't going to be thrilled, but it is that cookie cutter. I think mall is perfect. It is, you throw you in that, you go, okay, I have no idea
Where
what
am I?
state I'm in. Yeah, where am I? Absolutely. Yeah. Um, it where you mentioned being a St. Louis fan. I went up to St. Louis a few years ago and we went to the Arch and we saw the ballpark, and I looked at my wife and said, still too soon. Still too soon. How were your feelings when they lost? Because your childhood team.
Well, by the time I came to Texas in 1983,
Yeah.
my team was the Rangers. I mean,
Okay.
I'm working here and I'm
Yeah.
investing motion, passion, and a lot of hard
Sure.
work into the. So I'm a Ranger fan. And I just say, the Cardinals are my National League team.
Yeah.
When when that happened, I was all Rangers. I mean, I didn't, obviously I didn't want the Cardinals to win, and I had no feelings that way at all. And to be where I was in Game 6, which was one of the most, probably the worst night I've ever had in baseball, and the story for me on Game 6 was in about the fifth or sixth inning. Uh, they came to us and said, "Hey, if you want to be on the field for the celebration, we have to go right now." And I said, "Go where?" And said, "Well, we're going to go downstairs into the tunnel." And my wife gets up, and some other people we were with got up, and my wife says, "You got to go." And I said, "I'm not going." I said, I'm not. That goes against everything I believe in."
Yeah.
He said, "Hey, you've been here a long time. You got to be on the field for this." And I said, "Okay." So as we're walking down there, we see some of the media that's already gathered, people I've known for a long time, and they're high fiving. "Hey, you deserve this. You've been here a long time." And we see the champagne on ice. We see, and you're just kind of you want to say, "Oh, no, I don't want to see it," but
No.
we're walking by the shirts, the caps. We walked by the Rangers clubhouse, and then we were down in the tunnel. And it's funny, I had met Charlie Pride for the first time in like 1975, and I'm sitting with Charlie and his wife, and we're watching the game on a little bitty TV, and we can hear the roar of the crowd. It was one of the most brutal nights I've ever spent, and end up losing that. And I can remember going to the car, and it was just, had on Ranger stuff, and Cardinal people are yelling at me and stuff. And then the next night in Game 7, we were way behind in the fifth inning, and I told my wife, I said, "Let's go to the bus. I'm not going to watch this clinch." And so we could hear the roar of the crowd from the bus, and just brutal. But it was tough. And the funniest part of that, Jesse, is my dad grew up with the Gas House Gang Cardinals in the 1930s, so he'd been a stout Cardinal fan all of his life, and he had never seen a World Series game. So I flew him from Southern Illinois down to Texas to see the Cardinals in the World Series. He sat right beside me, had on a Ranger cap, Ranger shirt, got to meet Mike Shannon, who was the voice of the Cardinals for a while. And so we're going back for Game 6 the next day. I'm flying him home, and I'm getting him on the plane, and both he and I had on Ranger hats, Ranger
Yeah.
jackets. As I'm putting him into his seat, he had a little trouble walking, but I'm putting him into his seat. The Cardinal fans are yelling at us, "You're not going to beat the Cardinals in St. Louis. You won't beat the Cardinals in St. Louis." And as I'm setting him down in his seat, he says, "They're right." And I said, "Right? Right about what?" He said, "Well, they're right." I said, "Right about what?" He said, "You're not going to beat the Cardinals in St. Louis." I said, "Hey, wait a minute. I just flew you down here. You got to stick by me for 2 World Series games, wearing your Ranger gear, and you're pulling for the Cardinals. We're just not going to beat them in St. Louis." Turns out he was right. but
Yeah.
but it was a tough time. It was tough. But at no point did I ever have any
Yeah. I
feeling.
know, I don't remember who said this, but um the first year against San Francisco, we felt like American League champions. The next year, we felt like World Series losers. Yes, we were watching it, and I remember when Josh came up in the extra innings, and I said, just win this thing. And he hits that, and you're like ecstatic, and then it just didn't work out. And that's the beauty of baseball.
Jesse, I will tell you, there's no better. I've never had a better feeling in my life in baseball than whether if I had some big hits in high school or something, but
Yeah.
never had a better feeling than after Game 5 that you've won Game 5, and you're going to St. Louis thinking, "Okay, we got a chance to win this thing, and we just have to win one game out of two." And I thought, we're coming back here world champions. I mean,
Yeah.
there's no better feeling than getting on that plane, going
Yeah.
to say, "Okay, we're going to win the World Series." So, but anyway.
No, all right. I have kept you longer than I should have, and I appreciate it so much. Any final thoughts before we get to the Mary question?
No, just I've had this great life that's been a mixture of music and baseball that I guess when I was a little kid, that was pretty much. And I tell everybody I'm still doing the same thing now that I was doing. I was 5 and 6 years old, is being in the backyard with wiffle ball bat and pretending to bring players up at Busch Stadium or something, and then playing music between innings, and I was doing play-by-play like Harry Carey. I was a PA guy at Busch Stadium. Was a guy named Charlie Jones. I was doing that. I always vowed when I went to the Grand Ole Opry to read a commercial at the Grand Ole Opry. I wanted to do it as good as Harry Carey made a Budweiser sound to a 7-year-old on the radio. But I've had this great career that's had a mixture of music and baseball, and couldn't have been any better. So,
well, you are a part of our lives. I remember my brother-in-law and I, when we lost Mark Holtz, and it was similar to the time Princess Diana was lost. And my brother-in-law, not in front of our wives, said, it's sad about Princess Diana, but Mark Holtz, he's part of the family, you know?
Mark
So,
was great. Mark was one of the best I've ever heard. He's really
yeah.
good. Really good.
And I love that we don't say it, but on the screen, hello, wind column.
Hello, Wincom. And I used, when I was at WSM in Nashville, I would listen to Ranger games on WBAP driving either in or coming home or whatever. And I remember Mark saying it's baseball time in Texas. So that's now before every game. As a salute to Mark, we say it's baseball time in Texas. So.
All right. I had one more question. I don't know if this is true, but I remember hearing you tell the story that you invented the dot race and your son would use that knowledge to flirt with a girl. Like, oh, you're going to the ballpark? What color do you want to win? Could you tell me a little bit about that?
Well, the dot race was still a phenomenal thing.
Yes.
And people, just yesterday I was at a speaking engagement. People wanted, why is it red, blue, and green? And I said, well, back in the mid 80s, the character generator only had 8 colors, and red, blue, and green would work the best. But yeah, that did happen. My son would ask me, hey, he'd come up to the booth before cell phones, and hey, who's going to win the dot race? And I go, why? He said, well, I got a girl here with me. And I said, I'm going to impress her. And I would tell him who was, and then it got more sophisticated. He don't want to know what the trifecta is going to be, and I'd give him the exact. Yeah, I did. That's unbelievable. And the whole thing started, Jesse, because at that time, as I told you earlier, I changed my career path where I was having to sell, which I never had sold before, and to get a package deal done with Whataburger, I came up with this dot race idea to sell a package to Whataburger. So that's how that happened.
That is hilarious. That is wonderful. I love that. All right. Chuck, I appreciate the time. I end every podcast, and if you're listening to this podcast because you love Chuck Morgan, thank you. I end every episode with the Mary question, and what that is Jay Armstrong is an honors English teacher, recently retired in the Philadelphia area. He would break apart the Bruce Springsteen song Thunder Road. He would look at the lyrics, he would talk about the themes, and his class would explore it the same way they would like a Robert Frost or Edgar Allan Poe poem. So, and at the end, he would ask, does Mary get in the car? So, Chuck, that was your homework. Does Mary get in the car at the end of Thunder Road?
And I mentioned earlier, I'm a big songwriting guy, so
Yeah.
I love lyrics.
Yes.
So my wife and I have debated this. We debated it a couple of years ago, and I brought it up to her again, and she has almost convinced me. I mean, I was convinced when I first ever heard Thunder Road, and then I looked at the lyrics back in the day. I thought, she goes with him. I think he came to her, and she told all these other guys not interested, and that he sold her on he was the guy.
Mm-hmm.
My wife has convinced me that she doesn't get in the car, and I have to agree with her, because I think that when he tells her that she doesn't look very good, that she's not.
You aren't beauty, but hey, you're all right.
Yeah, you're all right. I think as my wife says, she would take offense to that, and she wouldn't have anything to do with the guy. So she's convinced me that as I get older, I think as a younger guy, I thought, okay, she gets in the car and starts a new life and
Yeah.
falls in love and all that. But my wife has convinced me that there's not too many females around that would, when a guy, once he says that, that really sticks in her mind, says, I'm not going with you. So she doesn't get in the car.
Well, my wife agrees with your wife. I think you are a wise man. Chuck, if I think you are on social media, correct? If someone wants to reach out to you, how can they?
They can always email me at cmorgan@texasrangers.com. Pretty easy email, but I'm on Twitter as at TexPAman, and
Mhm.
I'm also on Facebook. And I've always, I'm going to tell you a real quick thing, Jesse. When I first came to the Grand Ole Opry, my first night there, Roy Acuff, who is the king of country music, called me into his dressing room, and I'm sitting there with Roy Acuff and Minnie Pearl, and I'm a young guy, and Roy says, I'm going to tell you something. This is your first night. He says, I want you to know if you're good to those people out there, they'll always be good back to you. So you always treat the fans with respect. And then I did a couple of road shows as an MC with Marty Robbins. I used to watch Marty at a county fair or a state fair. He would sit and sign autographs until the last person left. And I said one time, Marty, why do you do it? And he said, because these folks are paying the bills. So I always try, and I've always tried with the Rangers. Uh, I mean, I can't throw any strikes and I can't hit any home runs, but the one thing I can do is be nice to the fans and welcome them to the ballpark. So I try to answer every email. I try to answer every Twitter when somebody has a question or a problem. I try to find them the answer to that. So I try to do all that. So I'll reply as soon as I can. So
But that sounds awesome, Chuck. I appreciate it. I think that is the right thing to do. I love that story of Rory Acuff. Ken Burns' country music documentary was one of my favorite. Just hearing that story and all that that journey people took. I'm excited about our new manager. I think somebody new said that we did a pretty good sales job to get him, but I'm excited about what he's going to do with this ball team.
yeah, I am too. And as long as I've been here, we've never had anybody that's had that kind of experience. And I'm to be quite frank, our ownership is tired of losing. They're ready to start winning, and that was the first step to get that going. And now they're working to improve the team. So I think some good things are going to happen. But I'm excited about Bruce Bochy being here.
Yeah, I think it's great that Bruce Bush is going to be here. I think that's a big time hire. I loved Walsh. I love Johnny Oates, but and Walsh will always have a special place in my heart because of all that he did. But it's going to be a good. I think the next few years, the future for the Rangers looks bright.
I hope so. I'm
Me
getting
too.
old. They need to win something fast. I don't
Exactly.
want to ride off the sunset till they win something. So.
Absolutely. Chuck Morgan, the voice of the Texas Rangers and an overall great guy. Thank you for joining me. Listeners, stay safe, be kind to each other, and we will talk to you soon. Goodbye. I want and need your feedback. You can reach me multiple ways to tell me what you like or don't like about the show. You can reach out to give me guest suggestions or maybe to join me on the podcast yourself. We're on Twitter at SetListingBruce or at Jesse Jackson DFW. I have an Instagram, SetListingBruce or Jesse Jackson DFW. Our Facebook page, facebook.com/setlistingbruce. Go to patreon.com/setlistingbruce to find out how you can support the show, and we have several tiers of support. Please go to your favorite podcast player and hit subscribe and tell a friend about the podcast because that is the way we're going to grow. If you're not tired of hearing me speak, you can hear me on Next Stop Everywhere, the Doctor Who podcast, where Charles Skaggs and I talk all things Doctor Who. The How Many podcast, where me and my friends Gary, Scott, Bob, and Jr. talk pop culture, and finally, my newest podcast, The Last Best Hope for Conversation, a Babylon 5 podcast, where Karen, Lou, and I are going through the TV show Babylon 5 one episode at a time. I am always looking for guests, so please reach out to me, setlustingbruce@gmail.com.
You just heard the fun talking, hard rocking, music loving, album ranking, fan thinking, joy spreading, lyric reading, story sharing podcast that is the one, the only Set Listing Bruce. The theme for Set Listing Bruce was written by David Rosen, used by permission.